Welcome back to Business in the Real World
Glad to be back.
for deep dive number 5.
Yeah.
We're going beyond the balance sheets and profit margins, all that stuff,
Yeah.
to explore something way more dynamic,
Yeah.
the world of stakeholders.
It's a bit of a buzzword, but for good reason. Stakeholders are anyone who can impact or be impacted by a business, and understanding those relationships can really either make a company or break it.
Okay, so it's not just about keeping shareholders happy. Sounds like we're talking about a whole ecosystem
Right.
of different groups, each with their own agenda.
Exactly. And it's more interconnected than you might think. Think of it like a spider web.
Okay.
You tug on one strand, and the whole structure feels it.
Oh, okay. That's a helpful visual. So who are these key players in the stakeholder web? Let's start with the most obvious. Owners and shareholders. They're the ones bankrolling the whole operation, right?
Right. They are, but their priorities can differ, depending on the type of ownership. A small business owner, they might pour profits back into the company for long-term growth,
Right.
even if it means delaying personal profits.
So it's not always about those immediate payouts. They're playing the long game. But what about those giant corporations? With thousands of shareholders, what are their priorities?
That's where things get interesting. With public companies, you have this constant tension between short-term gains to appease investors and long-term sustainability for the business itself.
Oh, the classic dilemma. But it's not just about the money people, right?
Yeah.
Employees are stakeholders, too. It's more than just a paycheck, isn't it?
Absolutely. Job security, fair wages, a healthy work environment, these are all critical factors. For employee satisfaction
Right.
and unhappy employees, well, that can translate to high turnover, decreased productivity, even strikes in extreme cases.
Yeah, I've definitely experienced firsthand how a toxic work environment can impact a company's bottom line. Speaking of impact, how do customers fit into this stakeholder equation? They're the ones actually buying the products or services, so their opinions must carry some weight.
More than ever before, customers are increasingly savvy and vocal, holding companies accountable for everything, from product quality to ethical sourcing practices.
Yeah, it's like they have a direct line to a company's reputation these days, especially with the power of social media. But let's flip the script for a moment. What about suppliers? They're essential to a business's operations, but we don't hear much about them.
That's because their influence is often more subtle, but no less important. Think about it. Reliable suppliers, timely payments, and strong communication. These are all crucial for a smooth-running business. A breakdown in that relationship can have a ripple effect throughout the entire supply chain.
So a company can't just focus on its internal operations. It's about nurturing those external relationships too.
Okay, we've covered owners, employees, customers, and suppliers. But what about the bigger picture? What about a company's impact on the community?
That's where we move beyond the purely transactional and into the realm of social responsibility. Companies don't exist in a vacuum. They're part of a larger community. And their actions have consequences for everyone around them.
So we're talking about things like job creation, environmental impact, even supporting local initiatives. It's about being a good corporate citizen, right?
Exactly. And it's becoming increasingly important for companies to demonstrate a genuine commitment to these values, not just as a PR stunt, but as an integral part of their business strategy.
Makes sense. Consumers are becoming more discerning, and they want to support businesses that align with their own values. Okay, last but not least, we have the government and regulatory bodies. They're the rule makers and enforcers, so businesses have to play by their game, right? Absolutely. We're talking about taxes, labor laws, environmental regulations, the list goes on. And navigating this regulatory landscape can be incredibly complex, especially for businesses operating across multiple jurisdictions.
So it's not just about keeping customers and employees happy. It's about understanding and complying with a whole web of rules and regulations.
Yeah.
But here's what I'm curious about. Are businesses becoming more responsive to stakeholders in recent years? And if so, why?
That's a great question, and it points to a fascinating shift we're seeing in the business world. It's no longer enough for companies to simply focus on profits. They need to consider the interests of all their stakeholders to truly thrive in the long run.
It's like stakeholders are holding more cards than ever before.
Yeah.
But how are they wielding that influence? And how are companies adapting?
That's what we'll dive into next. From consumer boycotts to shareholder activism, there's a whole arsenal of tools that stakeholders are using to make their voices heard.
This is where things get really interesting. I'm eager to unpack these dynamics and understand how this shift in power is reshaping the business landscape.
What's fascinating is we're seeing a confluence of factors driving this shift towards stakeholder empowerment. On the one hand, consumers are becoming more aware and informed. demanding greater transparency and ethical practices from the companies they support.
Yeah, I've definitely noticed that myself.
Hmm.
It's not just about getting a good deal anymore. People are actively researching companies,
Mm-hmm.
reading reviews, and making conscious choices about where they spend their money.
Exactly. And with the rise of social media, consumers have a powerful platform to voice their concerns and amplify their impact. A single viral post about a company's unethical behavior can damage their reputation overnight.
Wow. It's like a real-time accountability system. Companies can't just sweep things under the rug anymore. But it's not just consumers' rights. What about other stakeholder groups? How are they flexing their muscles?
Well, on the investor side, we're seeing a surge in what's called ESG investing. That stands for environmental, social, and governance factors. Investors are increasingly looking beyond just financial returns, considering a company's impact on the environment, their treatment of employees, and their overall ethical practices.
So it's not just about maximizing profits at any cost. Investors are realizing that a company's long-term success is intertwined with its social and environmental responsibility. That's a pretty big shift in mindset.
It is, and it's putting pressure on companies to step up their game. We're seeing more and more businesses publishing sustainability reports, implementing diversity and inclusion initiatives, and engaging with their communities in meaningful ways.
It sounds like stakeholder pressure is actually driving positive change in the business world. But let's go back to our listener for a moment. How can they use this knowledge to navigate the business world more effectively?
That's a great question. For starters, being aware of the different stakeholder groups and their interests can help you make more informed decisions as a consumer. You can research a company's track record on social and environmental issues before you buy their products. You can support businesses that align with your values. And you can use your voice to advocate for change.
It's like voting with your wallet,
Yeah.
but with an added layer of awareness and intentionality. And what about for someone who's thinking about starting their own business? How can understanding stakeholders help them build a successful company?
Well, from the get-go, entrepreneurs need to think about their business through a stakeholder lens. Who are the key players they need to engage with? What are their needs and expectations? How can they create value for all stakeholders, not just themselves?
So it's not just about coming up with a great product or service. It's about building a business that's sustainable and responsible from the ground up. But let's get practical for a moment. How can businesses actually communicate effectively with such a diverse range of stakeholders? It's like trying to speak multiple languages at once.
That's a great point. And it highlights the importance of targeted communication. Different stakeholder groups have different information needs and communication preferences. Investors might be looking for detailed financial reports, while employees might value regular updates on company performance and future plans.
So it's about tailoring the message to the audience. But it's not just about what you say right. It's also about how you say it.
Absolutely. Authenticity is key. Stakeholders can spot a PR stunt a mile away. They want to see genuine commitment and transparency from the companies they interact with.
So it's not just about talking the talk. It's about walking the walk. But with all these different voices and perspectives, how can businesses even begin to prioritize their stakeholders? Are some groups inherently more important than others?
That's where things can get tricky. And it's a question that businesses grapple with constantly. There's no one-size-fits-all answer. But many companies use something called a materiality assessment to identify and prioritize their most important stakeholders.
Okay, that sounds intriguing. Tell me more about these materiality assessments. How do they work?
Essentially, it's a process of identifying and evaluating the economic, social, and environmental issues that are most important to a company's stakeholders and to the company's own success.
So it's about finding those areas of overlap where a company's actions can have the greatest positive impact on both its stakeholders and its bottom line.
Precisely. It's about aligning business goals with stakeholder expectations. And it can be a powerful tool for driving positive change and building trust.
Okay, I'm starting to see how understanding stakeholders is so much more than just a box to check. It's really about building a more sustainable and equitable business ecosystem.
Absolutely. And it's an ongoing journey. The stakeholder landscape is constantly evolving, so businesses need to be adaptable and responsive to stay ahead of the curve.
It's like that spider web analogy we talked about earlier. You can't just focus on one strand. You have to understand how they're all connected and how your actions ripple throughout the entire web. So as we wrap up this deep dive, let's bring it all back to our listener. What's the so what? Why does all of this matter for the everyday person?
Well, on a practical level, understanding stakeholders can help you make more informed decisions as a consumer, an employee, an investor, or even a future entrepreneur. But on a deeper level, It's about recognizing that we're all part of this interconnected business ecosystem. Our actions, our choices, they all have consequences. And by understanding the stakeholder perspective, we can start to build a more sustainable and equitable future.
It's a powerful reminder that business isn't just about profits. It's about people, communities, and the planet we all share.
Exactly. And it's about recognizing that we all have a role to play in shaping a more responsible and sustainable business world.
Well said. And I think we've given our listeners a lot to ponder today. So before we sign off, a big thank you to Google Notebook LM for the powerful AI assistance in putting together this episode. And as always, this has been a PLC strategy production.
Yeah, it's inspiring to see how stakeholders are driving this shift, toward a more conscious and responsible way of doing business. It really is, and it highlights a crucial point that we haven't touched on yet. Sometimes the most important stakeholders are the ones who don't have a seat at the table.
Oh, interesting. You're talking about those silent stakeholders,
Yeah.
like the environment, future generations, even animals impacted by business practices. They don't have a voice, in board meetings or shareholder votes. So it's up to the rest of us to consider their interests.
Precisely. It's about thinking beyond short-term gains and considering the long-term consequences of business decisions. How will our actions today impact the world we leave behind for future generations?
Wow, that's a powerful question. And it forces us to expand our definition of what it means to be a responsible business. It's not just about profits and shareholder value. It's about creating a world where businesses operate in a way that benefits all stakeholders, present and future.
And that's where the concept of stakeholder capitalism comes in. It's the idea that businesses should be accountable, not just to their shareholders, but to all stakeholders, creating value for society as a whole.
It's like a shift from a narrow focus on shareholder primacy to a broader view of shared prosperity and sustainability. But how do we actually measure a company's performance in terms of stakeholder value? It's not as simple as looking at their profit margin, right?
That's true. Traditional financial metrics don't always capture the full picture. We need new ways to assess a company's social and environmental impact, their commitment to ethical practices, and their contributions to the well-being of their employees and communities.
It sounds like we need a whole new set of metrics and frameworks to evaluate businesses in this new era of stakeholder capitalism. And it's not just up to businesses themselves to figure this out, right? Consumers, investors, and policymakers all have a role to play in shaping this new landscape.
Absolutely. It's a collective effort. Consumers can choose to support businesses that align with their values. Investors can direct their capital towards companies that prioritize sustainability and social responsibility. And policymakers can create regulations and incentives that encourage responsible business practices.
It's like we're all co-creating this new paradigm, where businesses are seen as a force for good in the world, not just engines of profit.
And that's an exciting prospect. It means that understanding stakeholders isn't just a matter of good business sense. It's about building a better future for all of us.
Well said. So to our listeners out there, we encourage you to continue exploring the world of stakeholders, to ask questions, to challenge assumptions, and to hold businesses accountable for their impact on the world. Remember, you have a voice, and you can use it to shape the kind of business landscape you want to see.
It's been a fascinating conversation. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into the world of stakeholders.
And that's a wrap on Deep Dive number 5. Be sure to tune in next time for another fascinating exploration of the business world. Until then, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.